Today we have two guests, Dr. Chidi, social anthropologist from University of Nigeria Nsukka, and Odette, an international student at Lake Forest College, and she's from Cameroon. Let's get right into the questions. So, does education need an official language?
Schooling often prescribes language used for different educational activities like teaching, taking exams, even textbooks and so forth. It doesn't seem to me that education is alone here. It does seem that even religion does that. So if you ever have been to any official religious event, there is usually a prescribed liturgy and the language for that liturgy.
So, why do we force people to use language in one particular way?
Growing up, it has always been what I always thought it was, the whole world does this way. But knowing better now, my observation as a college student now, it's a systematic approach, just how the world is going to function with different set of rules. So I think those same rules were applied when it comes to education. And with the historical background of these languages that we're using now, it's as a result of colonialism. So it has always been a system, and we are just stuck with it. We have had advantages, we have had disadvantages, and so always been maintained that way. So I think it's just a system thing.
Education is an instrument of socialization. If you ask those who are more given to the functionalists, education is also an instrument of power. Language is an instrument of control. I speak English today. I intellectualize in English more than I do in my language because I was raised in a particular part of the world where all my education from primary school, secondary, university, PhD, English. And I see this now as being controlled. School being groomed, being cocooned in a particular universe where I operate in a language that is distant from me. But what I think is why people standardize language is that you can't possibly use, if it's in a formalized setting, every ethnic group's language to educate, everybody within a particular schooling setup, because you have to have a compromised variety that everybody will operate in. So that's, for me, the coming together of different communities, different societies now warrants that we have a sort of standard. It's unfortunate that, English was more widespread. They sacrificed a lot to even colonize the rest of the world. They lost men, they lost women. So today they are reaping the benefits of that, because almost in every part of the world.
Yeah, Chidi, I have no sympathies for the British or any European colonizer for losing men and women. If you were to count the number of people Europeans lost and those lost by the colonized, you realize the numbers are incomparable. As a matter of fact, no one invited Europeans to go colonize any part of the world. And of course, we cannot make colonialism a model and then require every other society to go colonize someone else for their language to be respected or for them to be able to learn in their language, right? So, going back to your own education, were you allowed to communicate in a language that you and your peers understood, even if it was not the official or prescribed language?
The standard in Cameroon is education is either French or English or both. So I was in this system where I had both every day. And then when I turned 9, I had to transfer to an Anglo-Saxon system, which is just English education. And that was under the Catholic school because I was just doing better in English. All my grades were better in English when I was in the bilingual system. So I wasn't really given a choice. It was more like it's logical. You are doing better in English. So just keep up that way in English. And then I finished primary education in class 6, which I finished in English, high school, university, English to now college English. So it has just been that way because I believe like everybody did it that way. Yes, in school, everybody spoke English and French, and you speak the language that the teacher comes in class with. If he starts the lecture in English, the whole day you're going in English. If he starts the lecture in French, the whole day you're going in French. And even when you're finishing secondary school, that's finishing high school, when you're choosing your university, most students, most youths, they choose where they know they have better control. And that's why I found myself in the University of Boya, first year university. I just couldn't see myself going to the University of Soa, Yaoundé, and studying in French. I didn't know the control of French that much anymore. I spoke French back home though, because that was the dominant language when it came to my family. But still, I was that exceptional child in my whole family that spoke more of English. And that's how I still function today with my dad as well. Everything I speak is in English. I write, I send him documents in English, but still I'll have to use use French because on the phone it's not just him. It's my mom, it's my grandmom, it's my cousins. French is more like, though I was born in it, it's like my second language, but I express everything in English. And for me, it has always been, that is just my standard. That is just what I know.
I grew up in a place that was colonized by the British. So it was natural at secondary school, primary. And I remember teachers struggling to explain things to us, switch codes, use Igbo to explain some things. And then we continued, even up to primary 4, primary 5. The teacher would at some point struggle to explain something in English, and would have to resort to Igbo to clarify. You could speak Igbo minimally. At some point at primary 6, secondary school, JS1, junior secondary school 1, it began to look like mockery. You were mocked if you could not express yourself in English. It was beginning to look like you were deficient. I heard stories of people being flogged for speaking English at school. This is a sense of exile, telling you that going to school means distancing yourself from your roots. At an epistemic level, is that it has limited my ability to intellectualize, like I said, in my own language, so that all of my reading and thinking and writing and engagement have been in English. So it's difficult for me to hold an intellectual discussion without bringing in English terms here and there, even if I struggle to do that in English. At some point, I find myself struggle through it. So it's also a mark of exception today to find somebody who can speak Igbo fluently without switching codes to English and back and forth. So today we respect, people are beginning to see that as an exceptional quality, being that not everybody can do that. So if you can speak in English, grow up in an environment that valorizes English so much, and yet you're able to operate very fluently in Igbo, people begin now to appreciate that it is an exceptional quality.
This is quite interesting, Chidi, because I too went to school in the Nsukka region. I recall vividly that in the transition from elementary to high school, your teachers and your peers made you feel like speaking Igbo was a shameful thing and speaking English was a mark of intelligence. As a matter of fact, our schools had policies then that prohibited the speaking of Igbo in school, especially in classrooms. And there were punishments for violating this policy. Punishments included sometimes assigning you some space in the schoolyard to go cut grass, or making you pay fine, and sometimes even corporal punishment, so you get flogged by the teacher or by your class prefect. And I think what was particularly interesting was the ways these policies created a psychological attitude toward the Igbo language. It made you feel ashamed, not only about the language, but also about the Igbo identity for the most part. So the question really is, if people learn organically in their communities using their various languages, does that learning shut down automatically once they walk into a school building simply because they are not using a European language? If we ask that question differently, does education lose some meaning? Does learning lose some meaning if we require students to use a foreign language and abandon their own language? Would learning become more meaningful if students were allowed to use their various linguistic repertoires just the same way they do in their communities? What do you think, Chidi?
Schooling is a process of exile in this part of the world. Schooling makes the language in which that schooling happens, makes you see this sphere, this domain, as something that doesn't necessarily belong to you. Our people finish going to school, and the job you are going to do from following the schooling is also something people approach with a sense of distance. People call it Oluoyibo. Oluoyibo is the job you get. That is the white man's, in translation, white man's job. The job you are being prepared for in this language is something you eventually get into, thinking that this work does not belong to me. This work does not belong with us. It's something you do. People say, that is that you don't carry the white man's job on your head. So this language that is the transition, the ladder, if you like, through which you transit to do this job, begins to prepare you to go and acquire this job, which you think the language itself prepares you to not see this thing as part of you. And because of this, people approach this job with a sense of levity, and they don't do it well. They do it lackadaisically. They leave it to go for school run and come back and so give excuses here and there. So there's a deep connection between this language and that job that you are going to do, having acquired this language. Because people don't feel a sense of connection acquiring this language, they do this job with the same sense of distance. And no society can work that way.
This is an important observation, Chidi, because I do recognize recognize this attitude not just in Nigeria but in many other colonized contexts I've visited, where people seem to have this deeper sense of commitment and responsibility toward their cultural and indigenous communities than they do for the nation state, which is of course an institutional legacy of colonialism. Anyway, this has been a fascinating beginning conversation. Thank you, Dr. Chidi and Odette, and thanks everyone following and contributing in the various channels where this is shared. I hope you can join us in future conversations.